America loves pretending its politicians were always serious adults in serious rooms making serious decisions. Then you actually open the history books and find toilet meetings, drunk speeches, naked river interviews, rabbit attacks, and one president dying after the most unnecessary macho performance ever. These are 10 times U.S. politicians did not just embarrass themselves, they embarrassed the entire country. Number 1. The Porcelain Throne, LBJ's Bathroom Briefings. Lyndon B. Johnson was a man who understood power not as a concept, but as a physical force. He was famous for the Johnson treatment, a combination of physical intimidation, flattery, and relentless persuasion that involved him leaning into a person's personal space until they buckled. However, his most infamous power play took place in the smallest room of the White House. Johnson did not believe the presidency should pause for dignity, privacy, or basic human decency. If he wanted a briefing, he got a briefing, even while sitting on the toilet with the door open. To LBJ, the Oval Office was wherever he happened to be sitting. Aides, cabinet members, and even foreign dignitaries were expected to follow him into the bathroom and continue high-level discussions about civil rights or the Vietnam War, while the President of the United States attended to his business. This wasn't just a lack of manners, it was a psychological weapon. By forcing powerful men to watch him in his most private moments, he stripped them of their own dignity. He made them feel small, awkward, and subservient. Johnson treated social awkwardness the way other politicians treat campaign promises. He simply ignored it. On one hand, it showed how aggressively he controlled every conversation. He was literally full screen in their lives, leaving them nowhere else to look. On the other hand, it made the most powerful office on earth feel like a hostage situation in a very small, tiled room. It remains one of the most bizarre examples of asserting dominance in the history of global leadership, proving that for LBJ, there was no line he wouldn't cross to make sure he was the only man in the room who felt comfortable. Number 2. The Tokyo Tumble, George H.W. Bush's dinner disaster. In January 1992, the world watched as American prestige took a literal nosedive in Japan. President George H.W. Bush was at a formal state dinner, sat beside Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa, attempting to strengthen trade relations and project an image of American strength. Instead, the president suddenly turned pale, vomited directly into the Prime Minister's lap, and fainted. This wasn't a scene from a slapstick comedy. It was a high-stakes diplomatic event turning into a medical emergency on live television. The fallout was immediate and surreal. In Japan, where etiquette is paramount, the event was so shocking that the Japanese public actually coined a new word for the incident, bushu suru, which literally translates to do the Bush thing, or to vomit in public. For months, the leader of the free world was a global punchline. The footage was replayed so many times that it became an indelible part of his political legacy, overshadowing his foreign policy achievements. Imagine representing the United States abroad and accidentally becoming a national punchline at the same time. Bush recovered quickly, blaming a 24-hour flu, but the image did not. In the middle of an election year, the optics were devastating. For one brutal news cycle, American prestige looked less like global leadership and more like a man losing a fight with his dinner. It was a reminder that no matter how much power you hold, human biology can turn a superpower into a slapstick routine in the blink of an eye. Number 3. The Naked Interview, John Quincy Adams' River Diplomacy. John Quincy Adams was perhaps the most intellectually disciplined president in history, but he had one habit that would make a modern Secret Service agent quit on the spot. He loved skinny dipping in the Potomac River. Every morning at dawn, the president would leave the White House, walk down to the riverbank, strip naked, and dive in for his morning exercise. According to Washington lore, this led to the most high-stakes interview in journalistic history. Anne Royal, a trailblazing and famously persistent journalist, had been trying to get an interview with Adams for months to discuss his stance on the Bank of the United States. Knowing his morning routine, she reportedly followed him to the river, found his pile of clothes on the bank, and sat on them. She refused to move until the President of the United States, who was standing neck-deep in the cold water, gave her the quotes she needed. With absolutely no leverage except the literal river, Adams was forced to conduct an official interview while completely exposed. Historians argue over exactly how much of this story is polished capital gossip, but the reason the story survived is obvious. It turns the presidency into a scene from a political cartoon. Even the possibility that this happened tells you that early Washington was a very different kind of chaos. It represents the ultimate clash between the dignity of the office and the relentless pursuit of the press. For Adams, the man of honor, being held hostage by his own birthday suit was a humiliation that no policy speech could ever truly erase. Number 4. Tongs and Tabernacles, the House Floor Brawl of 1798. The early Congress liked to talk about Republican virtue, honor, and restraint, all the elegant words politicians use right before acting like feral children. In 1798, the tension between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans reached a boiling point. During a heated debate on the House floor, Representative Matthew Lyon spat directly into Roger Griswold's face. This was not a metaphorical spit, it was a literal physical insult in the middle of a legislative session. Naturally, this did not calm things down. A few days later, Griswold retaliated by attacking Lyon with a wooden cane while he was sitting at his desk. Lyon, not to be outdone, ran to the fireplace, grabbed a pair of heavy iron tongs, and began swinging. The two men wrestled and struck each other in front of their horrified and cheering colleagues. It was the birth of American political violence, and it looked less like the creation of a constitutional republic and more like a tavern fight staged inside a furniture warehouse. The country was barely out of its founding era, and already lawmakers were trying to beat each other with household objects in the national legislature. It set a precedent for the caning of Charles Sumner decades later. But this 1798 brawl was particularly humiliating because of the choice of weapons. Fighting with fireplace tongs isn't dueling with honor, it's a desperate scramble that turned the hallowed halls of Congress into a comedy of errors. It remains a stark reminder that beneath the powdered wigs, America's founders were often just one insult away from a barroom scrap. Number 5. The Tank Fiasco. Michael Dukakis and the Helmet. In 1988, Michael Dukakis was facing a serious image problem. His opponent, George H.W. Bush, was painting him as soft on national defense. To counter this, the Dukakis campaign arranged what they thought would be a powerful photo opportunity. The candidate would ride in an M1 Abrams tank at a General Dynamics plant in Michigan. They wanted to project commander-in-chief energy. Instead, they produced one of the most backfiring moments in modern political history. Dukakis climbed into the tank wearing an oversized military helmet that made his head look tiny and comical. As he poked his head out of the hatch, grinning and waving, he didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a man who had gotten lost on the way to a costume party and wandered into military hardware by mistake. The footage was so visually ridiculous that the Bush campaign immediately turned it into a devastating attack ad, running it on a loop to the sound of a mocking soundtrack. That is the brutality of politics. You can spend years building policy credentials and serving as a successful governor, then one bad camera angle turns you into a national meme before memes even had a name. America watched a presidential candidate audition for seriousness and somehow produce accidental sketch comedy. The tank ad didn't just hurt his poll numbers, it fundamentally changed how campaigns handle visual optics, serving as a permanent warning to any politician who tries too hard to look like something they aren't. Number 6. The Big Stink. Andrew Jackson's 1,400-pound cheese. Andrew Jackson was a man of the people, and in 1835, the people, specifically a dairy farmer from New York, decided to give him a gift, a mammoth block of cheese weighing roughly 1,400 pounds. It was 2 feet thick and 4 feet in diameter. It was the kind of gift that sounds less like praise and more like a prank from history itself. Jackson, unsure of what to do with a ton of dairy, decided to leave it aging in the White House entrance hall. For 2 years, the cheese sat there, slowly fermenting. By the time Jackson's term was ending in 1837, the smell was so foul it was described as a physical wall of odor. To get rid of it before Martin Van Buren moved in, Jackson held a public reception and invited the citizens of Washington to eat the cheese. Thousands showed up, hacking away at the block and carrying chunks home. The cheese was gone in 2 hours, but the legacy remained. The oils and the stench had soaked into the drapes, the carpets, and the very wood of the White House. The next administration inherited the odor like it was some cursed dairy ghost. Imagine moving into the White House and discovering your real first opponent is not a rival party, but an ancient smell of presidential cheese. It took months of airing out the building and replacing the furniture to remove the scent. This was statecraft with notes of mold and regret, a literal and metaphorical big stink that reminded the world that Old Hickory didn't always have the most refined approach to White House management.
Number 7. The Duel of the Vice President. Aaron Burr versus Hamilton. Aaron Burr managed something that still sounds fake even when you know it happened. In 1804, while serving as the sitting Vice President of the United States, he challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel over a series of personal insults. They met at Weehawken, New Jersey, where Burr drew his pistol, fired, and mortally wounded one of the nation's most famous statesmen. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a constitutional nightmare. But the humiliation didn't end with the gunshot. Burr did not immediately vanish into the wilderness like a melodramatic outlaw. He returned to Washington, D.C. and continued presiding over the Senate as if nothing had happened. He sat in his chair, gavel in hand, while under murder indictments in both New York and New Jersey. Just picture the scene. The man in charge of Senate procedure had recently shot a founding father to death and was now back doing parliamentary paperwork like it was a mildly inconvenient legal hiccup. It was one of the clearest moments when early American politics stopped pretending to be noble and showed its full reality as prestige, ego, and violence wearing powdered wigs. The fact that a sitting vice president could kill a political rival and then simply go back to work for several months is an indictment of the honor culture of the time. It made the American government look like a collection of unstable duelists rather than a stable republic, proving that even the highest offices were occupied by men who put their personal pride above the law. Number 8. The Killer Rabbit, Jimmy Carter's Swamp Encounter. In 1979, the United States was dealing with the energy crisis, the Cold War, and rising inflation. President Jimmy Carter, seeking a brief moment of peace, went fishing alone in a small boat in his home state of Georgia. During the trip, a large swamp rabbit, distressed and swimming for its life, approached his boat and tried to climb aboard. Carter, not wanting a wet, panicked animal in his lap, waved it off with a paddle. The actual event was a weird footnote in a busy week. However, when the press got hold of the story, they transformed it into the infamous Killer Rabbit incident. The headlines made it sound like the President of the United States had been hunted by a crazed aquatic bunny. It became a metaphor for his entire presidency. A man who was allegedly too soft to handle the big problems couldn't even handle a single rabbit without a struggle. Carter didn't do anything disgraceful. He basically shooed away an animal. But politically, it was a gift to his critics. It made the presidency look fragile, awkward, and weirdly defenseless against nature's fluffiest chaos goblin. It is perhaps the most 70s humiliation possible, a moment of quiet, rural oddity that the media machine ground into a symbol of national weakness. No superpower wants a headline about their leader being attacked by a bunny, and for Carter, it became an unfair but permanent stain on his public image. Number 9. The window jump, Abraham Lincoln's great escape. Before Abraham Lincoln became the solemn face carved into mountains and classroom posters, he was a raw, ambitious Illinois politician who was perfectly willing to use chaos as a tactic. In 1840, the Illinois state legislature was in a heated debate over the state bank. Lincoln and his fellow Whigs wanted to prevent a vote they knew they would lose, and the only way to do that was to prevent a quorum, ensuring there weren't enough members present to make the vote legal. The Democrats, realizing the tactic, locked the doors of the State House to keep the Whigs inside for the count. Lincoln, a man known for his incredible height and athleticism, didn't just sit there and take it. He ran to the back of the room, opened a first-floor window, and launched himself out of it, followed by a few of his allies. Just imagine the future great emancipator flying through a window frame because he didn't like how a vote was going. It is funny precisely because it clashes so hard with the Honest Abe marble statue image. This was not the calm elder of national mythology. This was a scrappy politician choosing physical escape over a legislative defeat. To make matters worse, it didn't even work. The clerk had already counted him as present before he hit the grass. It remains a hilarious reminder that even the most legendary figures in history had moments where they abandoned dignity for a quick exit. Sometimes democracy sounds majestic, and sometimes it sounds like a man escaping through architecture. Number 10. The fatal speech, William Henry Harrison's pride. William Henry Harrison's 1940 campaign was a masterpiece of branding, but his 1941 inauguration was a masterpiece of self-sabotage. Harrison wanted to prove he wasn't the old man his critics claimed he was. He wanted to show he was rugged, tough, and unbreakable. So, on a freezing, rainy March day in Washington, D.C., the 68-year-old president delivered the longest inaugural address in American history, nearly 2 hours long, without a coat, a hat, or gloves. He stood in the biting wind, reciting a dense, classically infused speech, essentially engaging in a macho performance of endurance. He thought he was projecting strength. Instead, he was inviting disaster. The old legend says this directly gave him pneumonia and killed him, while modern historians suggest he may have actually died from typhoid due to the White House's poor water system. The political symbolism of the macho speech became immortal because it was too perfect a cautionary tale. A newly elected president tries to look rugged and unbreakable, ignores common sense, and then dies just 32 days into office. It turned the most important speech of his life into a national tragedy with a punchline attached. It remains the ultimate example of political hubris, the idea that a politician's image of strength is more important than their actual health. America's grand opening for a presidency became one of the shortest and most embarrassingly self-sabotaging, leaving behind a legacy of what if and a very clear lesson on the importance of wearing a coat. Now, settle this properly. Which one of these was the single most humiliating moment in U.S. political history, and what absolute disaster got robbed from this list? Drop the name, drop the incident, and defend your pick like a lunatic in the comments. If this video made you laugh, cringe, or lose even more faith in politicians, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more historical chaos.